In any given week, this planet produces around 88 significant earthquakes, and you never hear about almost any of them. They happen under empty ocean, in the dark, unwatched. But in the week of May 22nd, 2026, the United States Geological Survey looked at all 88 and flagged exactly one of them as a danger to actual human beings. It was not the biggest. Several were larger. The one they flagged was a magnitude 6.0 that struck American soil beneath a populated Hawaiian coast on an island with a volcano already erupting on it. Tonight we're going to follow that single earthquake all the way down, past the broken glass, past the volcano everyone wanted to blame, down to 22 kilometers, where we will find the real reason it happened. And I promise you, the real reason is not even the worst part. Before we get into it, if you enjoy what we do here at Project Nightwatch, take a second to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next debrief, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Let's dive in. Part 1. The night the big island shook. It was a quiet evening on the Kona Coast. The sun had gone down hours earlier, the way it always does on the western side of the island of Hawaii, and most people had already settled into the slow, ordinary rhythm of a Friday night. Dishes were drying in kitchen racks. Children were on the floor with their toys. Somewhere a television was playing. And then, at 46 minutes past 9 o'clock, the entire island moved. It did not move gently. One resident later described being in the kitchen when, without a single second of warning, the whole apartment simply started to shake. Another woman described it as terrifying, like something out of a movie, and the detail she gave is the one that stays with you. Her young son was crawling on the floor when the shaking began, and her mother, the boy's grandmother, did the only thing a grandmother does. She stood over the child and shielded him with her own body, because the glass had already started coming. The cabinet doors had swung open and the dishes were falling, and the grandmother took those impacts herself, plates and glasses striking her back and her arms while she covered the boy. When the family was finally able to look around their home afterward, they found a scene that the clinical language of a government bulletin can never quite capture. Everything was on the floor. Drawers had emptied themselves. Shelves had thrown their contents across the room. A heavy armoire, the kind of furniture you do not move without two people and a plan, had simply toppled onto its side. Even the toilet had cracked. That is what a magnitude 6.0 earthquake feels like when it happens directly beneath the place you live. And tonight, it happened on American soil, on the most geologically alive island in the United States, on the same island that right now is home to an actively erupting volcano. That combination, an erupting volcano and a major earthquake on the same piece of ground in the same week, is the reason we are here for the next 2 hours. But before we get anywhere near the volcano, you need to understand the earthquake itself, because the earthquake is hiding something. It is hiding a fact about these islands that most people, even people who have lived in Hawaii their whole lives, have never really stopped to consider. And that fact is far stranger and far larger than the shaking that broke those dishes. Think about how the rest of the world pictures Hawaii. The word itself summons an image, and the image is one of the gentlest places imaginable. Soft beaches, warm water, palm trees leaning over turquoise bays, flowers, sunsets, calm. Hawaii is, in the global imagination, a synonym for peace. The place you go to escape, the opposite of danger. It is on the front of travel brochures precisely because it represents the absence of threat. And that image is not wrong, exactly. The beaches are real, the bays are real. But the image is profoundly incomplete, because it shows you only the surface, only the thin and beautiful skin of the place. Underneath that skin, the island of Hawaii is one of the most restless, most geologically violent, most physically dynamic pieces of ground anywhere on the planet. It is a place where new land is being manufactured in real time, where mountains taller than Everest are still actively growing, where the crust of the earth itself is bent out of shape, and where every so often the gap between the postcard and the reality is closed in a single terrifying instant. The night of May 22nd was one of those instants. For a few long seconds the brochure fell away, and the people of the Big Island were left looking directly at what their paradise is actually built on. Let us start with the hard numbers, because the numbers are where the story has to begin. The earthquake struck at 7 hours, 46 minutes, and 1 second Coordinated Universal Time on May 23, 2026. In local Hawaii time, that was 9:46 in the evening on May 22nd. The United States Geological Survey placed the epicenter roughly 12 kilometers, about 7.5 miles, south of a small coastal community with a name that is genuinely difficult for outsiders to pronounce, Honaunau-Napoopoo. Hold that location in your mind because it matters. This is the Kona side of the Big Island, the leeward side, the dry and sunny side where the coffee farms climb the slopes and where the tourist boats go out to Kealakekua Bay. It is the side of the island where Captain Cook met his end in 1779 and where the ancient place of refuge, the Puhonua o Honaunau, still stands as a national park. This is not empty ground. This is lived in, worked in, visited ground. And the earthquake came up from underneath it. The depth is the next number, and it is one we are going to come back to again and again tonight, so let it settle in now. 22 kilometers, about 14 miles straight down. That is deep. That is far below the surface of the island, far below the shallow rumbling that volcanic islands produce all the time, far below the magma chambers, down in the structural bones of the place. Remember that number, 22 kilometers. By the time we are finished, that single number is going to tell you something profound about what this island actually is. The shaking radiated outward from that point, with a force that surprised even people who have lived through Hawaiian earthquakes before. On the standard scale that scientists use to measure how strong shaking feels at the surface, as opposed to how much energy the earthquake released, the worst of it reached intensity 7. Intensity 7 is described with the words very strong. It is the level at which ordinary well-built structures begin to take damage, the level at which it becomes genuinely difficult to stand. And here is the part that tells you just how significant this event was. The shaking was not confined to the Big Island. It was felt on Maui. It was felt on Oahu. It was even felt faintly on Kauai. The entire inhabited Hawaiian chain registered this earthquake. You have to understand why that is remarkable. The Hawaiian Islands are spread across hundreds of miles of open Pacific Ocean. A person sitting in a home on the windward side of Oahu in a neighborhood like Kailua or Hawaii Kai is a very long way from the Kona Coast of the Big Island. Under normal circumstances, an earthquake on the Big Island is a Big Island event. People on Oahu do not feel it. They read about it the next morning. But this time, the phones on Oahu lit up. People on the east side of Oahu, people who have lived there for decades, said they had never felt anything quite like it. They felt the floor move beneath a building separated from the epicenter by a wide stretch of ocean and by the whole bulk of another island. That reach, that ability to be felt across the entire state, is the first clue that this earthquake was not an ordinary shallow tremor. Something about its depth, something about its size, something about the way it released its energy, let it travel. There is a particular quality to the first seconds of an earthquake that anyone who has lived through one will recognize, and it is worth describing, because it tells you something about why these events frighten people so deeply. When the shaking begins, there is a moment of pure confusion. The mind reaches for an ordinary explanation. A heavy truck passing outside, someone moving furniture upstairs, a door slamming somewhere in the building. For a second or two, the brain insists on a small, mundane cause, because the alternative, that the ground itself, the one thing in all of human experience that is supposed to be absolutely fixed and reliable, is moving, is almost too large to accept. And then the shaking grows, and the small explanations fall away, and there is a sudden, vertiginous understanding. The floor is not solid. The floor is moving. The one thing you never have to think about, the stillness of the earth beneath your feet, has been taken away. That is the feeling that residents across the Big Island experienced at 9:46 on the night of May 22nd. Not just the physical shaking, but that deeper, more disorienting loss, the loss of the ground as something you can trust. And the shaking on May 22nd was not brief. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake does not produce a single sharp jolt. It produces a sustained, rolling, building motion that can last for many long seconds, and when you are inside it, those seconds stretch out into something that feels much longer. The energy arrives in waves, in a literal sense, different types of seismic waves reaching the surface at different times, so that the shaking can seem to ease and then surge again, ebb and then return. For the people in that kitchen on the Kona Coast, the experience was not a moment. It was an ordeal with a beginning, a terrifying middle, and an end that, when it finally came, left them standing in a transformed room. surrounded by everything that had been on their shelves a minute earlier. So picture the scene as it stood in the first minutes after 9:46. An island shaken hard enough to topple furniture, a family on the floor, a grandmother covered in broken glass, phones ringing across 4 islands, and in the dark, somewhere offshore of the Kona Coast and 14 miles down, the rock had just slipped. The question every resident was asking in that moment was the obvious one, the human one. Was that the big one? Is there more coming? Is a wave on its way? Those are the right questions for a person to ask in the dark after their home has been shaken, and we will answer every one of them before this video is over. But the question we're going to spend the next 2 hours building toward is a different one, a deeper one, the one that the news coverage tends to skip past on its way to the next headline. Why did it happen at all? Why did the rock 14 miles beneath the Kona Coast choose that night, that depth, that exact patch of crust to fail? Because the answer is not what you would expect. The answer has almost nothing to do with the volcano glowing just a few dozen miles away, even though every instinct will try to connect the two. The answer is not about magma, and it is not about eruption. The answer is about weight. It is about a force so simple and so enormous that it hides in plain sight. A force that has been acting on these islands every second of their existence, and that almost no one ever stops to think about. And once you understand that weight, once you really grasp what it is doing to the crust of the earth beneath Hawaii, you will never look at a Hawaiian island, or a postcard of one, the same way again. Part 2. One alert on a planet full of earthquakes. Here is something most people do not know about the Earth. It is, seismically speaking, almost never quiet. In any given week, the planet produces something on the order of 100 earthquakes large enough to be scientifically significant, magnitude 4.5 or greater, and most of them you will never hear about. They happen under the deep ocean. They happen along remote mid-ocean ridges where no one lives. They happen far offshore in the cold, dark trenches where the continents do not reach. The Earth is constantly adjusting itself, constantly releasing strain, and the vast majority of that activity passes completely unnoticed by the 8 billion people living on the surface. In the 7 days surrounding the Hawaii earthquake, the global seismic network recorded roughly 88 earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 or larger. 88. That is a perfectly ordinary week. And among those 88 events were several that were, by the raw numbers, larger than the Hawaii earthquake. There was a magnitude 5.9 near Batung in Indonesia. There was a magnitude 5.7 on the southeast Indian Ridge, far out in the Southern Ocean. There was a magnitude 5.7 near the Admiralty Islands of Papua New Guinea. There was a magnitude 5.6 in the Fox Islands of the Aleutian Chain. By magnitude alone, several of those earthquakes outranked the one that struck Hawaii, and yet, out of all 88 earthquakes that week, the United States Geological Survey flagged exactly one of them with a damage alert. One, and it was not any of the larger ones. It was the Hawaii earthquake. To understand why, you need to understand a tool that the USGS runs quietly in the background after every significant earthquake on Earth. It is called PAGER. The name stands for Prompt Assessment of Global Earthquakes for Response, and it does something genuinely clever. Within minutes of an earthquake, long before any human being on the ground has filed a damage report, PAGER produces an estimate of how bad the event is likely to be for people. It does this by taking the earthquake's location, its depth, and its magnitude, and then layering that information over 2 other maps. One map shows where people live, how densely the population is packed around the epicenter. The other map shows how vulnerable the buildings in that region are, whether they are built of reinforced concrete and steel, or of unreinforced masonry and older, weaker materials. PAGER combines all of that, and it assigns the earthquake a color. Green means the earthquake, whatever its magnitude, is not expected to cause significant harm. Most of those 88 weekly earthquakes are green, because most of them happen where there is nothing and no one to harm. Yellow is the next level up. Yellow means there is a real possibility of localized damage, that some people will feel strong shaking, that the event warrants attention and monitoring. And above yellow are orange and red, the levels that signal expected serious losses, the levels that mobilize disaster response on a large scale. The Hawaii earthquake was the only yellow alert on the entire planet that week. Think carefully about what that means, because it is the cleanest possible illustration of a truth that the magnitude scale on its own completely hides. A magnitude 5.9 in the deep ocean is, in human terms, almost nothing. It releases its energy into water and empty seafloor, and the world barely notices. A magnitude 6.0 directly beneath a populated American island, with homes and roads and water lines and families above it, is a genuine event. The difference between those two earthquakes is not in the rock. The difference is in what is sitting on top of the rock. Let us make that contrast even more concrete, because it genuinely reshapes how you should hear earthquake news for the rest of your life. Consider the magnitude 5.9 that struck near Bitung, Indonesia, in that same week. By the raw energy released, that earthquake was almost identical to the Hawaii event, perhaps marginally smaller, perhaps within the margin of measurement. If you had only the magnitude numbers in front of you, you would treat the two events as essentially the same. But the Bitung earthquake occurred offshore, at a depth and in a location where it threatened relatively little, and it passed with no damage alert at all. A green event, a number in a database. The Hawaii earthquake, fractionally larger, occurred directly beneath a populated coastline of the United States, and it became the single flagged event on the planet. Same energy, completely different consequence. The entire difference was geography, the difference between rock that fails beneath open water and rock that fails beneath a kitchen where a family is standing. This is why seismologists, and why this channel, are always a little uneasy when earthquake coverage focuses purely on the magnitude number, treating it like a score in a game, bigger always meaning worse. The magnitude is only half of the equation, and arguably the less important half when it comes to what an earthquake actually does to human lives. The other half is exposure. It is the answer to the question, who and what was standing above the rock when it broke? A modest earthquake under a city can be a catastrophe. A massive earthquake under an empty ocean can be a non-event. The pager system exists precisely because the professionals understand this, because they know that to respond intelligently to an earthquake you must immediately ask not just how big, but how big and where and above whom. On the week of May 22nd, the answer to that combined question pointed at exactly one place on Earth. It pointed at the Kona Coast of Hawaii. This is the first idea I want you to carry with you through the rest of this video. When you hear a magnitude number, your instinct is to treat it as the whole story. It is not. The magnitude tells you how much energy the earthquake released. It tells you absolutely nothing about who was standing above it. The truly dangerous earthquake is not always the biggest number. It is the number multiplied by the lives in its reach. And on this particular week, on a planet humming with 88 earthquakes, the one that mattered most to actual human beings was the one beneath the Kona Coast of Hawaii. Not because it was the largest, because it was ours. There is one more thing the pager system quietly relies on, and it deserves a mention because it touches on something the rest of this video will keep returning to. Pager's estimate of how much damage an earthquake will cause depends heavily on its model of how vulnerable the local buildings are, and building vulnerability is not the same everywhere on Earth. In some regions, the same magnitude earthquake that produces light damage would produce catastrophe, because the buildings are made of unreinforced masonry, of heavy materials assembled without the flexibility to ride out shaking. In other regions, modern building codes and lighter, more flexible construction mean a community can absorb a substantial earthquake with comparatively modest losses. When Pager assessed the Hawaii earthquake and concluded that the likely outcome was light to moderate damage rather than something worse, that conclusion folded in an understanding of how Hawaiian homes are built and how they tend to behave when the ground moves. The yellow alert, in other words, was already a relatively reassuring assessment. It said this earthquake would be felt, would matter, would cause real but limited harm. It was not an orange alert. It was not a red alert. And the distance between yellow and those higher levels is, itself, a quiet measure of how much worse a magnitude 6.0 can be when it strikes a place less prepared to absorb it. So the USGS lit that one event yellow, and the alert went out and the assessment was blunt and specific. Light to moderate damage was considered possible. Anyone who experienced damage was asked to report it. That is the official, measured, government language for what we already saw in Part 1. The broken glass, the cracked toilet, the toppled armoire, the grandmother shielding the child. Yellow is the bureaucratic word for a family standing in the wreckage of their kitchen at 10 o'clock at night. But a damage alert tells you that an earthquake mattered. It does not tell you why the earthquake happened. For that, we have to go back to the seismographs, and we have to learn how scientists take the invisible motion of rock 14 miles underground and turn it into a cause. Because the cause of this earthquake is where the story stops being ordinary and starts being genuinely strange. Part 3. Reading the waves, what the seismographs said. When an earthquake happens, it does not simply make the ground shake, it broadcasts. The slipping of rock against rock sends out energy in the form of waves, and those waves travel through the entire body of the planet, racing outward in all directions, passing through the deep mantle and the core, emerging on the far side of the world. Scattered across the globe is a network of extraordinarily sensitive instruments, seismometers, whose only job is to catch those waves as they arrive. And from the timing and the shape and the character of those waves, a seismologist can reconstruct an event they will never see, an event that took place miles underground in total darkness, in a fraction of a second. This is worth pausing on, because it is one of the quiet miracles of modern science. Nobody watched this earthquake happen. Nobody could. It occurred 22 kilometers below the surface of the Earth, inside solid rock, where no instrument can ever be placed and no eye can ever see. And yet within minutes, scientists knew its size, its precise location, its depth, and the direction the rock had moved. They knew all of this because the earthquake itself told them, in the language of waves, broadcast to a planet covered in listening devices. It helps to understand a little about the waves themselves, because they are the entire reason a hidden event can be reconstructed. An earthquake sends out several distinct types of waves, and they travel at different speeds. The fastest are the pressure waves, the ones seismologists call P waves, which race through the rock by compressing and expanding it, the way sound moves through air. Behind them come the slower shear waves, the S waves, which move the rock from side to side, and trailing both are the surface waves, which travel along the skin of the planet and which carry much of the energy that actually shakes buildings. Because these wave types travel at different and well-known speeds, the simple gap in arrival time between the fast P wave and the slower S wave at any single seismometer tells a scientist how far away that earthquake was from that instrument. Gather that distance measurement from 3 or more seismometers in different directions, and the location of the earthquake can be pinned down precisely, the way 3 overlapping circles intersect at a single point. The depth, the magnitude, the direction of slip, all of it is teased out of the detailed shape and timing of these waves as they arrive at instrument after instrument across the world. An earthquake is, in a very real sense, a message, and the planet is wired to receive it. For the Hawaii earthquake, that message was received and decoded with remarkable speed. Within minutes of the rock slipping 14 miles beneath the Kona Coast, the waves had reached enough instruments for the first automated picture to form, and within roughly an hour, human experts had refined that picture into a finalized solution. A hidden, midnight, underground event, reconstructed in detail before most of the island had even finished asking each other whether they had felt it too. Now, here is where we need to be honest with you, because honesty is the whole point of this channel, and because if we are not honest about this, you will hear a confusing thing elsewhere and not know what to make of it. In the first minutes after the earthquake, the very first automatic estimate produced by the computers said the magnitude was 5.96, not 6.0, 5.96, and the depth in that first estimate was given as roughly 22.5 kilometers. Then, within about an hour, that number was revised. The finalized value, the one that scientists settled on after human experts had reviewed the incoming data from seismometers around the world, was magnitude 6.0 at a depth of 22 kilometers. Meanwhile, a completely separate scientific body in Europe, working independently with its own instruments, had logged the event as magnitude 6.0 from the start. So you will see 2 numbers attached to this earthquake, 5.96 and 6.0, and I promise you, somewhere out there, someone is going to take that small discrepancy and try to build something sinister out of it. They are going to say the magnitude was changed, that the government adjusted the number, that the truth was quietly edited. So let us deal with that right now, cleanly, before it has a chance to grow. Here is how earthquake measurement actually works. The instant an earthquake's waves begin arriving at seismometers, computers generate an automatic solution. It is fast, it is preliminary, and it is explicitly understood by everyone in the field to be a first draft. As more data flows in from more instruments farther away, human seismologists review that first draft and refine it. The location gets sharper. The depth gets more precise. The magnitude gets adjusted. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system. It is doing exactly what it is designed to do. And notice, please, the direction of the revision in this case. The number went up from 5.96 to 6.0. If you wanted to imagine a government quietly downplaying an earthquake to prevent public alarm, you would imagine them revising the number downward, making it smaller, making it less frightening. That is not what happened here. The number was refined upward, and it was done in public, and the entire revision history sits in an open, archived, publicly accessible database that anyone on Earth can examine. A cover-up does not happen in a public archive. A cover-up does not revise the scary number to be slightly scarier. What you are looking at is not concealment. It is simply science correcting its own first draft in front of an audience the way it always does. The number to carry forward, the final reviewed agreed upon number, is magnitude 6.0, depth 22 kilometers. So now we have a clean, reliable picture. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake 22 kilometers down beneath the Kona Coast. But the seismographs gave the scientists more than just a size and a location. The shape of the waves, the particular fingerprint of the energy that arrived at all those distant instruments, carries information about how the rock moved. Did it slip sideways, the way the rock moves along the San Andreas Fault in California? Did one block of rock thrust up and over another, the way it does in the Great Subduction Zones? Or did the rock pull apart? The waves encode the answer. There is a piece of terminology that surfaced in some of the early commentary about this earthquake, and it is worth addressing directly so it does not confuse you. Some descriptions called this a volcano-tectonic event. That phrase can be misleading if you do not know how it is used. In the loosest sense, a volcano-tectonic earthquake simply means an earthquake that happens in a volcanic region, but is driven by tectonic stress rather than by the direct movement of magma. It is a label about the setting and the mechanism, not a claim that the volcano did it. And the substance, in this case, is not ambiguous at all. Whatever loose label gets attached, the cause was the one the experts identified. It was the load. It was the bending. It was not magma, and it was not the eruption. So if you see the phrase volcano-tectonic attached to this earthquake, do not let it pull your mind back toward the volcano. It is, if anything, a phrase that confirms the opposite. An earthquake in a volcanic place that was nonetheless tectonic, structural, a product of stress and not of fire. And when the scientists at the United States Geological Survey, specifically the experts at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, the people who watched this island more closely than anyone alive, examined the depth, the location, and the recorded seismic waves of this earthquake together, they reached a conclusion. They stated it plainly. This earthquake, they said, was caused by stress due to bending of the oceanic plate from the weight of the Hawaiian island chain. Read that sentence again, slowly, because almost everyone hears it once and moves on, and in moving on they miss the single most extraordinary fact in this entire story. The earthquake was caused by bending, by the bending of the oceanic plate. From the weight of the islands are heavy enough to bend the earth, and the bending is what broke those dishes in that kitchen on the Kona Coast. We need to spend real time with that idea, because once you truly understand it, the whole Hawaiian archipelago transforms in front of you into something far more unsettling than a chain of tropical paradises. Part 4. An island too heavy for the earth. Let me ask you to do something. Find, in your mind, a long wooden plank, and lay it flat across two supports, one at each end like a simple bridge over a stream. Now imagine walking out to the middle of that plank and standing there. What happens? The plank bends. It sags downward beneath you, curving under your weight, and it stays bent for exactly as long as you stand on it. The wood is strong. It does not break, but it is not infinitely rigid, and so it flexes, and the flex is a direct, visible response to the load you have placed on it. Now I want you to make that plank into the floor of the Pacific Ocean, and I want you to make yourself into the island of Hawaii. The crust of the Earth, the outer shell of the planet, is often imagined as something perfectly hard and unyielding, a fixed stage on which everything else happens. It is not. The oceanic crust beneath the Pacific is strong, yes, but it behaves, over long enough timescales and under large enough loads, a great deal like that wooden plank. It can flex, it can bend, and if you place a sufficiently enormous weight on top of it, concentrated in one spot, it will sag downward beneath that weight, and the rock all around the sag will be placed under stress. So now we have to talk about just how heavy the Big Island really is, because the word heavy does not begin to do it justice. The island of Hawaii is built almost entirely from two colossal shield volcanoes, Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea, with several smaller volcanoes attached. And Mauna Loa, the volcano on whose western flank this earthquake struck, is not just a big mountain. By total volume, counting everything from its true base on the ocean floor all the way to its summit, Mauna Loa is one of the single largest mountains on the entire planet. The part you can see, the part that rises above the waterline, is only a fraction of it. The mountain continues downward through nearly 5 kilometers of ocean, and then it continues still further, because the weight of the volcano has, over hundreds of thousands of years, pressed the ocean floor itself downward into a depression. The entire island of Hawaii represents a mass of volcanic rock so vast that the human mind cannot really hold it. Trillions upon trillions of tons of basalt, piled up by the slow, patient work of the Hawaiian hotspot, a plume of heat rising from deep within the earth that has been manufacturing these islands for tens of millions of years. And all of that mass, that unimaginable concentrated weight, is sitting on the oceanic plate. Sitting on the plank. Let me try to give that abstract phrase trillions of tons, something closer to a real shape in your mind, because the number on its own is just a blur of zeros. Mauna Loa rises more than 4,000 meters above sea level, but its true base is not at sea level. Its true base is on the floor of the Pacific, nearly 5 kilometers down. And even the ocean floor is not the bottom of it, because the weight of the volcano has pressed the ocean floor itself downward into a broad depression, so the real foundation of the mountain lies even deeper still. Measured from its genuine base to its summit, Mauna Loa stands taller than Mount Everest. It is, by the total volume of material it contains, one of the largest individual mountains anywhere on Earth, and it is only one part of the island. Beside it stands Mauna Kea, comparable in scale. Around them, the smaller volcanoes. The island of Hawaii is not a piece of land that happens to have mountains on it. The island is the mountains. It is one continuous colossal pile of volcanic rock, and the ocean simply laps against its upper slopes. Now place that pile on the oceanic crust. The crust here is the Pacific Plate, the largest tectonic plate on the planet, and where the Hawaiian Islands sit, that plate is old and cool and strong. But strong is not the same as infinitely rigid. Over the timescales and under the loads we're talking about, the plate behaves like that wooden plank, like a sheet of something stiff but flexible, and when you concentrate the weight of an entire mountain range, of Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea together, onto one patch of that plate, the plate responds the only way physics allows. It sags. It bends downward beneath the load, forming a broad bowl-shaped depression in the seafloor that geologists can actually map. The islands sit in the centre of their own dent in the earth, and the plank is bending. This is the mechanism. This is what the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory meant by stress due to bending of the oceanic plate from the weight of the Hawaiian island chain. The island is so heavy that it deforms the crust beneath and around it. The crust flexes downward under the load, and that flexure does not happen for free. Bending rock stores stress, the same way bending a plank stores tension on one side and compression on the other. The rock around and beneath the bend is being squeezed and stretched, loaded with strain, year after year after year, as the hotspot keeps adding mass to the island above. But rock has a limit. Rock can only hold so much stress before something gives, and when the stress in the flexing crust finally exceeds the strength of the rock at some particular point, the rock fails. It slips, suddenly and violently, releasing in a few seconds the strain that took centuries or millennia to accumulate. That sudden release is an earthquake. And on the night of May 22nd, 22 kilometers beneath the Kona Coast, in the flexed and loaded crust under the western side of Mauna Loa, the rock reached its limit, and it slipped, and the islands shook from one end of the chain to the other. I want you to sit with the strangeness of this for a moment, because it genuinely is strange, and familiarity should not be allowed to make it ordinary. When most people think about why Hawaii has earthquakes, they think about lava. They think about magma forcing its way through rock, about volcanic chambers swelling and draining, about the violence of eruption. And that kind of earthquake does happen in Hawaii constantly. But that is not what this was. This earthquake had nothing directly to do with magma. This earthquake happened because the islands themselves, simply by existing, simply by being as massive as they are pressing down hard enough on the skin of the planet to crack it. And here is a detail that makes the flexural mechanism even clearer and even stranger. The bending of the plate does not only produce stress directly underneath the heaviest part of the load. When you bend a stiff sheet, the deformation spreads outward. Press down hard in the middle of that plank, and you will notice that the plank does not only sag beneath your feet, it actually flexes upward, very slightly, a little distance away on either side, like the rim of a shallow bowl. The crust around the Hawaiian Islands does something similar. There is the central downward sag beneath the islands themselves, and there is a broad, subtle flexural arch in the seafloor surrounding them. The whole region is deformed, pushed and pulled into a complex shape, and different parts of that shape are under different kinds of stress, some squeezed, some stretched. The earthquake of May 22nd happened somewhere within that field of flexural stress, at a depth and a location where the bending had loaded the rock past its limit. This means the earthquakes of weight are not confined to a single fault or a single spot. They are a regional phenomenon distributed through the bent and stressed crust beneath and around the entire island. They are, in the most fundamental sense, the Earth's structural response to being asked to carry Hawaii. And the more you understand that, the more the ordinary picture of the islands inverts. We think of the land as resting peacefully on the seafloor. The truth is closer to a standoff. The island pushes down with unimaginable weight. The crust pushes back with all the strength of cold, ancient rock. And the earthquake is the moment, every few years, when that standoff is briefly, violently renegotiated. The paradise is a load. The postcard is a weight. Every one of those green volcanic islands, rising so beautifully out of the blue Pacific, is also a burden pressing on the Earth's crust, and the crust is groaning beneath the burden, and every so often it groans loudly enough that the people living on the burden feel the floor move under their feet. That is what happened here. The Big Island leaned a little too hard on the world, and the world pushed back. It is worth understanding, too, that this flexural process is not unique to Hawaii in principle, even though Hawaii is one of the most spectacular examples of it on Earth. Anywhere a large enough load is concentrated on the crust responds by flexing. Great river deltas, where millions of years of sediment have piled up, flex the crust beneath them. The immense ice sheets of the last ice age pressed the crust down so far that, thousands of years after the ice melted, parts of the land are still slowly springing back upward. Geologists call this general behaviour isostasy, the tendency of the Earth's crust to adjust, to float and flex, in response to the loads placed on it and removed from it. Hawaii is simply one of the clearest, most dramatic cases, because the load is so enormous, so concentrated, and so geologically young. The islands are a textbook demonstration, written at planetary scale, of a principle that governs the whole surface of the Earth. The crust is not a rigid floor. It is a flexing, floating, responsive thing, and it is always adjusting to what sits upon it. And here is the thought that should genuinely keep you awake. The hotspot is not finished. The Hawaiian hotspot is still there, still rising, still feeding magma upward, still building. The Big Island is still growing. There is a new volcano already forming on the seafloor to the southeast, a future island in its infancy, which means the load is not static. The load is increasing. The weight on the plank is not constant. It is slowly, relentlessly growing heavier with every eruption, every lava flow, every cubic metre of new rock. And as long as that is true, the flexing will continue, the strain will keep accumulating, and earthquakes like the one on May 22nd are not freak events. They are not anomalies. They are a permanent structural feature of what it means to be a Hawaiian island. They are the sound of the Earth bearing a weight that never stops getting heavier. That is the central fact of this entire story, and everything else we discussed tonight orbits around it. But the earthquake didn't happen just anywhere on this overloaded island. It happened in a very specific place, on the flank of a specific giant, and that location has its own story to tell. Part 5. The western flank of a sleeping giant. The epicenter of this earthquake, the point on the surface directly above where the rock first slipped, sat on the western flank of Mauna Loa. And because the title of what you are watching speaks of an earthquake striking an erupting volcano, we have to be extremely careful and extremely precise right here, because precision is what separates this channel from the noise. So let us be exact about what happened and where. Mauna Loa is one of the two great active volcanoes of the Big Island. Its name means long mountain, and the name is honest because Mauna Loa is a vast, gently sloping dome that makes up a huge portion of the southern half of the island. It is an active volcano. It last erupted at the end of 2022 in an event that drew the eyes of the world for a few weeks. But on the night of May 22nd, 2026, Mauna Loa was not erupting. It was quiet. It was, in the language of volcanology, in repose, sitting in the long pause between eruptions that defines most of any volcano's existence. So when we say the earthquake struck on the western flank of Mauna Loa, we are describing a location, a place on the map. We are saying the epicenter sat beneath the broad western slope of that mountain, on the Kona side. We are not saying the volcano did this. We are not saying magma drove the earthquake, and this distinction is not pedantry. It is the entire point. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory was emphatic, and they were emphatic precisely because they knew this confusion would arise. The earthquake, they said, had no apparent effect on either Mauna Loa or Kilauea. It was not a volcanic process. It was the deep flexure of the plate, 22 kilometers down, far below the plumbing of the volcano, in the structural foundation of the island. Why does the location on Mauna Loa's flank matter at all, then, if the volcano did not cause the earthquake? It matters because of geometry, and because of weight, the theme we cannot escape tonight. Mauna Loa is the single most massive feature on the island. If the island is a load pressing on the crust, then Mauna Loa is the heaviest part of that load, the centre of gravity, the place where the plank is pressed down hardest. And so it is no accident, no coincidence, that the flexural stress reached its breaking point in the crust beneath that mountain. The heaviest part of the weight produces the deepest part of the bend, and the deepest part of the bend is where the strain concentrates, and where the strain concentrates is where the rock eventually fails. The earthquake happened beneath Mauna Loa's flank, not because Mauna Loa erupted, but because Mauna Loa is the reason the crust there is bent in the first place. Now let us put real human geography onto this map, because an epicenter is just a dot until you understand who lives around it. The Kona Coast is the western, leeward shore of the Big Island. It sits in the rain shadow of the great volcanoes, which makes it the dry side, the sunny side, the side where the resorts cluster, and the cruise ships anchor, and the snorkeling boats head out at dawn. Above the coastline, on the lower slopes of Mauna Loa, lies the Kona Coffee Belt, one of the most famous coffee-growing regions on Earth, where the elevation and the volcanic soil and the afternoon clouds combine into something farmers have prized for well over a century. Scattered through that landscape are towns and communities, Captain Cook, Kealakekua, Honaunau itself, tens of thousands of permanent residents, and on any given night, a large floating population of visitors in hotels and rental homes and condominiums, and just offshore lies Kealakekua Bay, a place layered with history. It was here, in 1779, that the British explorer James Cook was killed in a confrontation on the shore, an event that echoes through the history of the entire Pacific. Today the bay is a marine sanctuary, famous for its clarity, its coral, its spinner dolphins, and the white obelisk on the far shore that marks the spot where Cook died. The city of refuge, the Puhonua o Honaunau, sits along this same coastline, an ancient Hawaiian sanctuary where those who had broken a sacred law could once flee to be absolved, its great stone wall and its wooden images still standing as a national historical park. This is the ground that shook on May 22nd, not an abstraction, not an empty dot on a seismic map, a living, working, deeply storied coastline with families in their kitchens and visitors in their beds, and 22 kilometers beneath all of it, the overloaded crust gave way. The intensity 7 shaking, the very strong shaking, fell hardest right here, on the Kona side closest to the epicenter. This is where the armoire toppled. This is where the grandmother was struck by falling dishes. The geography is not decoration. The geography is the reason a deep slip of rock became a frightening night for real people. There's also something worth saying about how a population like this experiences an earthquake, because it is not the same everywhere. The Big Island is, in many places, a rural island. Homes on the Kona slopes are often older, often built of wood, sometimes raised on post and pier foundations rather than anchored to a continuous concrete slab. Building styles like that have their own relationship with shaking. Wood frame homes tend to flex and ride out moderate earthquakes better than rigid masonry, which is part of why a magnitude 6.0 in Hawaii produced light to moderate damage rather than widespread collapse. but raised homes can shift on their piers, contents fly off shelves and out of cabinets regardless of how the house is built, and water heaters, propane lines and the like all become hazards in their own right. The damage we heard described, the empty cabinets, the toppled armoire, the cracked toilet, is exactly the signature of intensity 7 shaking in this kind of housing. Not the dramatic pancaking of buildings you might picture from footage of great urban earthquakes, but the pervasive household-scale wreckage that turns every room into a hazard and every family's night into a long cleanup. And it is worth noting one more thing about this stretch of coast, something that will matter later. The Kona Coast and the southern flanks of these volcanoes have a long and serious seismic history. This is not the first time this part of the island has been violently shaken, and the earthquake of May 22nd, as significant as it was, is very far from the largest thing this ground has ever done. We will get to that. We will get to the events that make a magnitude 6.0 look almost gentle. But first, we have to turn and face the thing that has been glowing on the horizon this entire time, because while the crust beneath Mauna Loa was bending toward its breaking point, just a few dozen miles away, another mountain was very much awake. Part 6. The volcano that was already awake. Everything we have discussed so far concerns a quiet volcano, Mauna Loa, in repose. But the island of Hawaii carries a second active giant, and that one was not quiet at all. To the southeast of Mauna Loa sits Kilauea, the younger, lower, and far more restless of the island's 2 great active volcanoes, and on the night the earthquake struck, Kilauea was in the middle of an eruption. This is the fact that makes the title of this video literally factually true. A major earthquake did strike an island that hosts an erupting volcano. The big island genuinely had, on the night of May 22nd, an active volcanic eruption underway. So we need to spend real time understanding what Kilauea was doing, because the relationship between this restless volcano and the earthquake is the central tension of the whole story, and it is a relationship that has to be described with absolute care. The honest version of this relationship is more interesting than the sensational version anyway. It usually is. Kilauea's current eruption is happening inside its summit, in the Great Collapse crater complex called Kaluapele, at a vent within the crater known as Halemaumau. And it is not a steady, continuous outpouring of lava. It is something more dramatic and more rhythmic than that. It is what volcanologists call an episodic eruption, and it works in pulses. The volcano builds toward an event, then unleashes it, then falls quiet, then builds again. Each individual pulse is called an episode, and they are numbered in sequence as they occur. In the days right before the earthquake, Kilauea had just completed episode 47 of this sequence. And episode 47 was a genuine spectacle. It ended abruptly at 27 minutes past midnight, Hawaii time on May 15th, after roughly 9 continuous hours of lava fountaining from the north vent. Lava fountaining is exactly what it sounds like. It is not lava oozing or creeping. It is molten rock blasted upward into the air in a sustained, roaring jet, driven by the violent expansion of volcanic gas. And during episode 47, that fountain of liquid rock climbed to a maximum height of around 650 feet. 650 feet. Picture a continuous glowing jet of molten rock, taller than almost any skyscraper in any American city, roaring out of the ground in the dark for 9 straight hours. That is what this volcano had done barely a week before the earthquake, and then episode 47 ended, and the volcano did what it always does between episodes. It went quiet, and it began, slowly, to refill. This refilling has a name and a measurable signature. It is called inflation. As fresh magma rises from deep within the earth and accumulates in the chambers beneath Kilauea's summit, the entire mountain physically swells. It puffs up almost imperceptibly, like a slow breath being drawn in. Scientists measure this swelling with extraordinary precision, using tilt meters and satellite radar, and they can watch the summit inflate in real time, and from the rate of that inflation they can forecast. They can estimate with real confidence when the volcano will have refilled enough to unleash its next pulse. So here is the situation on the night of May 22nd laid out exactly. Kilauea had finished episode 47 on May 15th. The summit had been steadily inflating ever since, drawing its slow breath. And the United States Geological Survey, watching that inflation, had issued a forecast. They expected episode 48, the next great pulse of fountaining, to arrive sometime between May 24th and May 27th. In other words, on the very night the earthquake struck, the Big Island had an actively erupting volcano sitting in a brief pause, with its next eruptive episode forecast to begin within 72 hours. Now hold that picture, because here is where everyone's instinct goes wrong, and here is where this channel has to do its actual job. The instinct, the powerful and natural instinct, is to connect these two things. An erupting volcano, refilling, about to burst, and then, suddenly, a major earthquake right next door. The mind wants, almost desperately, to draw a line between them. It wants the earthquake to be the trigger. It wants the earthquake to be the spark that sets off episode 48, or the warning sign that the volcano is about to do something far larger. The story practically writes itself, and across social media that night, that is exactly the story that began to spread. But it is not what the science says, and the gap between what the mind wants and what the data shows is exactly the territory this channel exists to walk through carefully. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, the single most authoritative source on Earth for this volcano, examined the earthquake and stated, without hedging, that it was caused by the flexure of the oceanic plate, that it was not a volcanic process, and that it had no apparent effect on either Mauna Loa or Kilauea. The earthquake happened 22 kilometers down, in the deep structural foundation of the island. Kilauea's eruptive machinery, its magma chambers and conduits, sits far, far above that, in the shallow plumbing near the surface. The earthquake was not in the volcano's plumbing, it was in the bones of the island, far beneath the plumbing. And consider the timing of the eruption forecast itself. The prediction that episode 48 would arrive between May 24th and 27th was made before the earthquake, and it was based entirely on the measured inflation of the summit, on magma rising and refilling on its own patient schedule. The eruption was already coming. It had been coming for days. The volcano did not need an earthquake to summon it, and the earthquake did not change the forecast. Two things were happening on the same island at the same time. One was the deep crust failing under the island's weight. The other was a shallow volcano refilling toward its next pulse. They share an address. They do not share a cause. It is worth dwelling for a moment on just how dramatic episode 47 really was, because it sets the stage for understanding what kind of volcano was sitting next door to this earthquake. A 650-foot lava fountain is not a curiosity. It is one of the most powerful displays of raw geological energy that anyone can witness from a safe distance on land. The fountain is driven by gas. Deep in the magma, dissolved volcanic gases are held under tremendous pressure, and as the magma rises toward the surface and the pressure drops, those gases come out of solution and expand violently, the way the gas in a shaken bottle of soda erupts when the cap comes off. That expanding gas blasts the molten rock skyward in a sustained roaring jet. For 9 hours on the night of May 14th into the 15th, that jet of glowing liquid rock stood in the air above Halemaumau, lighting the underside of the clouds visible for miles. This is the volcano that the earthquake's critics wanted to connect to a deep, 22-kilometer flexural event. And understanding the sheer, gas-driven shallow violence of episode 47 actually helps you see why that connection does not hold. The fountaining is a near-surface phenomenon, a story of gas and pressure in the uppermost few kilometers of the volcano. The earthquake was a story of the deep crust, far below all of that. They are dramas playing out on completely different stages. There is one more honest detail to add here, because in the aftermath of the earthquake there were reports of an urgent volcano review being launched. That is true, and it is worth understanding properly, because a careless reading of it feeds exactly the wrong conclusion. When a strong earthquake shakes an island with active volcanoes on it, the standard, responsible, textbook response of a volcano observatory is to immediately check those volcanoes, not because the earthquake is expected to have set anything off, but because due diligence demands you confirm that the violent shaking did not destabilize a magma system, did not crack a conduit, did not change anything. That review is a precaution. It is the scientific equivalent of checking that nothing fell off the shelf. It is not an admission of a hidden link. It is what careful people do, and in fact, the result of that careful checking was reassuring. The instruments showed the volcanoes quiet, undisturbed by the shaking continuing on their own established paths. Mauna Loa remained in repose. Kilauea continued its slow inflation toward episode 48, exactly as forecast. The review did its job, and its job was to confirm that the deep earthquake and the shallow volcano were, as the science predicted, running on separate tracks. So the volcano was awake. The volcano was in fact days away from its next great fountain of fire, and a major earthquake struck the same island in the dark. The two are neighbours, sharing one extraordinary and overloaded piece of ground. But they are not the same story, and pretending they are would mean walking right past the genuinely remarkable thing, which is the weight, the bending, the strain in the deep crust. The volcano is the dramatic foreground. The flexing of the earth beneath an island too heavy for it, that is the real story. And it is not finished. Because an earthquake of this size does not simply happen once and stop. It echoes. Part 7. Aftershocks and the hours that follow. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake does not end when the shaking stops. The ground does not simply slip once and then return to perfect stillness. When a patch of rock fails, when it ruptures and releases its stored strain, it throws all of the surrounding rock into a new and unsettled arrangement. Stresses that were balanced before the earthquake are suddenly unbalanced, and the rock responds to that imbalance the only way it can, with a long series of smaller adjustments, smaller slips, smaller earthquakes. We call them aftershocks, and they are not a sign that something has gone wrong. They're a sign that the Earth is doing exactly what physics demands. In the case of the Hawaii earthquake, the first aftershock arrived fast. About 6 minutes after the magnitude 6.0 main shock, a magnitude 3.2 earthquake struck in essentially the same area, slightly to the northwest of the original epicenter. 6 minutes. The rock had barely finished moving from the first event before it began adjusting again. And the magnitude 3.2 was not alone. It was simply the most noticeable of a small sequence of aftershocks that rippled through the same patch of crust in the minutes and hours that followed, including smaller events, down around magnitude 2, that most people would never feel at all. To understand why aftershocks happen, and why they behave the way they do, think back one more time to that bending plank. When the rock failed in the deep crust beneath Mauna Loa, it did not relieve all of the stress in the entire region evenly and perfectly. It relieved the stress in one specific patch, and in doing so, it actually increased the stress on the patches of rock immediately surrounding the rupture. Imagine a crowded room where everyone is leaning against everyone else, all the forces balanced. Now one person suddenly drops to the floor. Everyone who was leaning on that person lurches, has to find new footing, has to readjust. The aftershocks are the surrounding rock finding its new footing. Each aftershock relieves a little more of the redistributed stress, and the system settles gradually toward a new equilibrium. Seismologists understand this process well enough to describe it with real mathematical regularity. Aftershock sequences follow predictable patterns. There is a well-established relationship, worked out more than a century ago, describing how the rate of aftershocks decays over time. In the simplest terms, aftershocks come fast and frequent in the first hours, and then their frequency drops off in a steady, predictable curve, so that the first day produces far more aftershocks than the second, the first week far more than the second week, and so on, tapering away over weeks and sometimes months. There is also a reliable relationship between the size of a main shock and the size of its largest aftershock, which on average tends to run roughly one full magnitude unit smaller than the main shock itself. For a magnitude 6.0, that rule of thumb would suggest a largest expected aftershock somewhere around magnitude 5, give or take. The single magnitude 3.2 6 minutes in sat comfortably below that, well within the ordinary range of what such a sequence produces. It was the leading edge of exactly the kind of decaying sequence the textbooks describe. And the overwhelmingly most likely future for this earthquake, the boring and reassuring and scientifically expected outcome, is that the aftershocks simply continue to fade, smaller and rarer, until the crust beneath Mauna Loa settles back into its long silence. But I have to be honest with you about the one piece of uncertainty inside that reassurance, because honesty is the whole job here. When seismologists talk about an aftershock sequence, they always carry a small, irreducible asterisk. There is always a probability, usually low, but never zero, that what everyone is calling the main shock turns out not to be the largest event in the sequence. There is always a small chance that an even bigger earthquake follows. When that happens, scientists simply relabel everything. The event everyone called the main shock gets renamed a foreshock, and the new, larger earthquake becomes the main shock. This is not a prediction. It is not a warning that it is about to happen here. It is simply an honest acknowledgement of how earthquake sequences work, and it is the reason that, in the hours after any significant earthquake, the responsible thing for both scientists and residents is a posture of watchful calm, not fear, watchfulness. This is why, in the immediate aftermath, experts urged Hawaii residents to be prepared for more aftershocks. That guidance is not alarmism. It is the practical, grounded reality of living through an earthquake sequence. The shaking on May 22nd was not necessarily a single discrete event with a clean ending. It was the opening of a process of the crust resettling, and that process plays out over time. A resident who feels a sharp jolt 2 days later is not feeling a new disaster. They are feeling the rock continuing to do what rock does after it breaks, and there is a practical human side to that guidance that is worth saying plainly, because it is the part that actually protects people. An aftershock sequence is, in a strange way, a second chance to take an earthquake seriously. After the main shock, a home may have hidden weaknesses it did not have before. A crack in a wall, a water heater shifted on its base, cabinet contents that have slid forward and are now poised to fall, items balanced precariously where they were knocked. The standard advice in the days after a significant earthquake is grounded and simple. Check for damage in daylight. Be cautious of anything overhead or anything heavy that may have shifted. Know that the smaller jolts are coming and will not, in all likelihood, be dangerous, but treat each one as a reminder to make sure the home is genuinely secured. For the family on the Kona Coast whose armoire had already toppled, the aftershock sequence was not a new threat so much as it was the island insisting over and over across the following days that the night of May 22nd had been real, and that the ground they lived on was not finished settling. There is also a quiet psychological weight to an aftershock sequence that the magnitude numbers never capture. After you have felt the ground move violently once, your body does not simply forget it. For days afterward, every truck that rumbles past, every door that slams, every ordinary vibration of daily life can send a jolt of adrenaline through a person, because the nervous system has learned a new and frightening lesson that the floor can move, and it is now watching for it. Many residents across the Big Island, and even across the other islands, would have spent the days after May 22nd in exactly that heightened state. That is a real cost of an earthquake, even one that causes only moderate physical damage. It rewrites, for a while, a person's basic sense of safety in their own home. And here is where the deeper theme of this video quietly reasserts itself. Why are there aftershocks at all? Because the stress in the region was not fully relieved. The magnitude 6.0 released a great deal of strain, but it did not release all of it, and the surrounding crust is still loaded, still bent, still bearing the weight of the island above. The aftershocks are small confirmations of that larger truth. They are the crust reminding us, in the days after the main event, that the fundamental condition has not changed. The island is still heavy, the plate is still bent, the strain is still there. The main shock was one large withdrawal from an account that remains, even now, very far from empty. So in the hours after 9:46 on May 22nd, the Kona Coast settled into an uneasy watchfulness. Each small aftershock sent a fresh ripple of anxiety through people whose nerves were already raw, and the question hanging over every one of those tremors was the question we still have not fully answered. Was the magnitude 6.0 the worst this island can do? And the answer, the genuinely sobering answer, is no, not even close. Because this flexural earthquake, deep and powerful as it was, is only one of the ways the island of Hawaii can break, and it is, by a wide margin, not the most dangerous one. Part 8. The fault that could do far worse. The title of this video makes a promise. It says that the earthquake striking an erupting volcano is not even the worst part. That is a strong claim, and on this channel a strong claim has to be backed by something real, or it should not be made at all. So now we are going to back it up. We are going to talk about the thing that genuinely is worse, the hazard that makes the magnitude 6.0 of May 22nd look almost mild by comparison, and to do that, we have to go back underground, but this time to a different depth and a different fault entirely. The earthquake we have spent most of this video discussing happened at 22 kilometers down in the deep flexed crust. That is one seismic system. But the island of Hawaii contains another, and the second one is shallower, and it is, in terms of raw destructive potential, far more frightening. Here is the thing about a shield volcano like Mauna Loa or Kilauea. It is not built on solid bedrock that grips it firmly in place. It is built up, layer by layer, from thousands upon thousands of individual lava flows, piled one on top of another over hundreds of thousands of years until the pile becomes a mountain, and that mountain sits on the old ocean floor, which is itself covered in a layer of soft marine sediment, the slowly accumulated mud and ooze of the deep sea. So you have an immense steep-sided pile of volcanic rock, and underneath it, a layer of relatively weak, slippery sediment. Now think about what gravity does to that arrangement. The volcano is enormously heavy, and it has steep flanks that descend into the ocean. Gravity is constantly, relentlessly trying to pull those flanks downward and outward, trying to make the mountain spread, trying to slide its sides toward the sea, and the weak sedimentary layer at the base acts almost like a lubricated surface, a nearly horizontal plane along which the whole flank of the volcano can, very slowly, slide seaward. Geologists have a name for that nearly flat basal fault. They call it a décollement, a French word that essentially means a detachment, a surface along which the upper material is detached from what lies beneath and can move independently. This is the second seismic system of the island of Hawaii, and it is the dangerous one. The southern flanks of these volcanoes, Kilauea's especially, are not firmly anchored. They are very slowly sliding toward the ocean, riding outward on that deep décollement fault. Most of the time, this motion is imperceptible, a matter of a few centimetres a year, far too slow to feel. But the motion is not always smooth. The flank can stick. Friction can lock a section of the décollement in place, and while it is locked, the relentless push of gravity and the spreading pressure of the volcano build strain against it, year after year, and then, when that lock section finally fails, when it suddenly unsticks, the entire flank lurches seaward in a single violent motion, and that motion is a major earthquake. This is a fundamentally different kind of event from the flexural earthquake of May 22nd. The flexural earthquake was deep, 22 kilometers down, the crust adjusting under load. A décollement earthquake is shallow, perhaps 7 to 10 kilometers down, and it is not the crust adjusting. It is an entire side of a volcano slipping toward the sea, and because it is shallow, and because it can involve an enormous area of fault slipping at once, a décollement earthquake on the Big Island can be far larger and far more violent at the surface than anything the deep flexure typically produces. The difference in depth alone matters enormously for what people experience. When an earthquake happens 22 kilometers down, its energy has a long way to travel before it reaches the surface, and along that journey it spreads out, weakens, disperses. By the time it shakes a kitchen on the Kona Coast, it has been attenuated by all those miles of intervening rock. That is part of why the May 22nd earthquake, despite being a genuine magnitude 6.0, produced light to moderate damage rather than catastrophe. But a décollement earthquake happens shallow, perhaps only 7 kilometers down, and that energy arrives at the surface far less diminished, far more concentrated, far more violent. A shallow earthquake of a given magnitude shakes the ground much harder than a deep earthquake of the same magnitude. So the décollement system carries a double penalty. It can produce larger earthquakes, and it delivers them from shallower, closer, more destructive depths. The same magnitude number means something very different depending on which of the island systems produced it. And here is the part that elevates this from a serious earthquake hazard to something that demands a different category of attention altogether. When a large section of a volcano's submarine flank lurches seaward suddenly, it does not just shake the ground, it shoves the ocean. A rapid, large-scale movement of the seafloor and the underwater flank displaces a colossal volume of water, and displaced water becomes a wave. A décollement earthquake, or worse, a true catastrophic collapse of an oversteepened flank, carries the potential to generate a tsunami. The flexural earthquake of May 22nd generated no tsunami at all, and could not have, because of its depth and mechanism. A great flank earthquake is a different animal entirely. The geological record around the Hawaiian Islands carries the evidence of just how extreme this flank behaviour can become at its absolute upper limit. On the seafloor surrounding the islands, mapped by sonar surveys, lie the scattered debris of enormous prehistoric landslides, the remains of past flank collapses on a scale that dwarfs anything in recorded human history. These were not the gradual 2-foot slips of an ordinary flank earthquake. These were catastrophic failures, entire sections of island flank breaking away and avalanching across the ocean floor, leaving debris fields that stretch for tens and even hundreds of kilometers. Those collapses happened in the deep geological past, long before any people were present to witness them, and they are extraordinarily rare, separated by enormous spans of time. Nothing about the May 22nd earthquake suggests anything of that kind is near. But the debris is there, on the seafloor, mapped and undeniable, and it tells you the absolute ceiling of what the flank system is capable of. The décollement is the fault that produces the major flank earthquakes, and the major flank earthquakes are themselves only the routine expression of a system whose rare extremes have, in the deep past, rearranged the islands themselves. You may be wondering, reasonably, why the flank slides at all, why gravity does not simply hold these volcanoes in a stable cone the way it holds an ordinary mountain. The answer is in the way a shield volcano is built, and in where its weak points lie. As Kilauea erupts again and again over thousands of years, magma does not only reach the summit, it also forces its way sideways, intruding into long underground zones on the volcano's flanks called rift zones. Each intrusion of magma into a rift zone acts like a wedge, a slow, persistent pressure pushing the flank of the volcano outward toward the sea. So the flank is not merely sitting there under gravity. It is being actively shoved seaward from within by the volcano's own plumbing, intrusion after intrusion, century after century. Gravity pulls down and out. The rift zone intrusions push out, and the weak sedimentary layer at the base offers a surface for the whole flank to move along. Put those together and you have a volcano whose entire seaward side is under a constant, patient pressure to slide. The décollement earthquakes are the moments when that pressure wins. So this is the worst part that the title promised. It is not that the May 22nd earthquake was secretly catastrophic. It was not. It was a magnitude 6.0, it caused light to moderate damage, and it will fade into the island's long seismic record as a significant but ultimately survivable night. The worst part is the realization of what else this island carries. Beneath the same beautiful slopes, beneath the same coastline, lies a second fault system, a sliding flank riding on a deep detachment, capable of producing earthquakes larger than the one we just felt, and capable of doing something the flexural earthquake never could. The worst part is not the earthquake that happened. The worst part is the earthquake that this island has proven, in living memory, it is fully capable of producing. And to understand that, we do not need to speculate or imagine. We only need to look back 8 years. Part 9. May 2018, when the flank slipped. On the 4th of May 2018, the south flank of Kilauea did exactly what the previous part of this video described. It slipped, and the result was the largest earthquake to strike the state of Hawaii in more than 4 decades. To understand why May 2018 matters so much to the story of May 2026, you have to remember the setting. In the spring of 2018, Kilauea was not merely erupting at its summit. It was undergoing one of the most dramatic volcanic crises in its modern history. Magma was draining out of the volcano's plumbing and forcing its way underground into the Lower East Rift Zone, far down the volcano's eastern flank, in a populated area called Leilani Estates. Fissures were tearing open in the ground between people's houses, erupting fountains and rivers of lava that would, over the following months, destroy hundreds of homes and reshape the coastline. The volcano was, in the most literal sense, coming apart along its eastern side, and in the middle of that crisis, on May 4th, the south flank moved. A magnitude 6.9 earthquake ruptured beneath the southern slope of Kilauea, and the scientific analysis of that earthquake is where this gets directly relevant to everything we have discussed tonight. When researchers studied the seismic waves from the 2018 event, they found that the rupture had occurred on a shallowly dipping fault, a fault inclined at only about 7 degrees from horizontal, almost flat. That gentle, nearly horizontal angle is the signature of the décollement, the detachment fault at the base of the volcanic pile, exactly the fault we described in the previous part. The magnitude 6.9 of 2018 was a décollement earthquake. It was the south flank of Kilauea lurching seaward, and it moved real distance. A specific section of Kilauea's sliding south flank, a slumping block that geologists call the Helena slump, shifted seaward by roughly 0.6 of a metre, about 2 feet, in a matter of seconds. 2 feet. An entire section of the side of a volcano displaced 2 feet toward the ocean in the time it takes to draw a breath. That is the kind of motion the decollement is capable of. Now compare the two earthquakes directly, because the comparison is the entire point. The May 2026 earthquake was a magnitude 6.0. The May 2018 earthquake was a magnitude 6.9. Those numbers look close. They are not close. Remember what we established earlier, that every single step up the magnitude scale represents roughly a 32-fold increase in released energy. The gap from 6.0 to 6.9 is most of a full step. The 2018 earthquake released something on the order of 20 times more energy than the 2026 earthquake. It was not slightly bigger, it was in a different class, and it was shallow, and it was the flank itself moving, which is why it shook the island so much more violently, and why it remains the benchmark, the largest Hawaiian earthquake in over 40 years. But the 2018 earthquake left behind something even more interesting than its size, something that speaks directly to the relationship between earthquakes and volcanoes on this island, and I want to handle it carefully because it is genuinely fascinating, and it is also easy to misuse. In the years since 2018, scientists studying the south flank of Kilauea noticed something. Before the 2018 earthquake, that part of the decollement fault had a habit. It produced what are called slow slip events, episodes in which the fault would creep, sliding gradually over days rather than rupturing all at once. These slow slips were a regular feature of the fault's behaviour, and then the magnitude 6.9 struck, and the slow slip events on that portion of the fault stopped. They simply stopped. Research into this found that the 2018 earthquake appears to have released so much accumulated stress from that section of the fault that it effectively reset it, and that it may take something close to 60 years for the fault to rebuild enough strain to resume its old slow slip rhythm. Think about that. A single earthquake, lasting seconds, altered the behaviour of a major fault system for what could be most of a human lifetime. This is a genuinely profound thing to sit with, because it changes how you should think about the timescale of these events. We tend to experience an earthquake as a moment, a sudden and brief violence with a clear beginning and a clear end, seconds of shaking, and then it is over. But that experience is an illusion of human perception. The seconds of shaking are only the visible tip of a process that runs on a scale our senses cannot register. The strain that the 2018 earthquake released took decades, perhaps far longer, to accumulate, and the consequences of its release will ripple through the fault's behaviour for decades more, suppressing the slow slip, quietly rearranging the stress, shaping what that section of the island does for 60 years into the future. The earthquake was not a moment. It was the loud, brief, central act of a drama that began long before any of us were watching and will continue long after. And the same is true of the May 22nd flexural earthquake. Its few seconds of shaking were the audible part of a process measured in centuries, the slow bending of the crust beneath an island too heavy for the seafloor it rests on. There is one more dimension of the 2018 event worth holding on to, because it speaks to the tsunami question we raised in the previous part. Researchers who studied the 2018 magnitude 6.9 examined its implications for tsunami hazard specifically, because a flank earthquake is exactly the kind of event that can move water. The 2018 earthquake itself did not produce a major destructive tsunami, but the analysis underscored what the decollement system is, in principle, capable of. When a section of submarine flank lurches seaward, the displaced water has to go somewhere. The 2018 event was, in a sense, a moderate demonstration of a mechanism whose upper limit is far higher. It was the flank system showing its hand without playing its strongest card. Why does all of this matter for tonight's story? Because it is real, documented, peer-reviewed evidence that earthquakes and the volcanic fault systems of this island genuinely do interact. They are part of one connected mechanical system, and that is the honest, grounded, scientific version of the connection that everyone wanted to draw between the May 22nd earthquake and the Kilauea eruption. The wrong version of that connection is the one that says the deep flexural earthquake of May 22nd triggered episode 48. That version is not supported, and the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory rejected it directly. But the right version, the version the 2018 event actually demonstrates, is subtler and in some ways more profound. It says that on the island of Hawaii, the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the sliding flanks are not separate phenomena that happen to share a location. They are facets of one enormous interconnected system of stress, a system in which a flank earthquake can silence a fault for 60 years, in which the weight of the islands bends the crust, in which magma and gravity and tectonics are all pushing and pulling on the same overloaded piece of ground. The May 22nd earthquake was the deep crust speaking. The May 2018 earthquake was the sliding flank speaking. They spoke from different depths, by different mechanisms, but they are voices in the same conversation, and the conversation is about an island under more stress, from more directions than almost anywhere else in the United States. And the 2018 flank earthquake was not even the loudest voice this island has ever raised. For that, we have to go back much further, into the long memory of the Big Island, to an event that makes everything we have discussed tonight look small. Part 10, 1868, and the long memory of the island. Modern instruments have only been listening carefully to the island of Hawaii for a relatively short slice of time, but the island itself has a much longer memory, and that memory is recorded in historical accounts, in the landscape, and in the work of geologists who have learned to read both. And the single most important entry in that long memory, the event that should anchor your sense of what this island is truly capable of, happened in the year 1868. In early April of 1868, the southern part of the Big Island, the district called Kau, was struck by a catastrophic earthquake. The best modern estimates place its magnitude at around 7.9, a magnitude 7.9. Set that next to the numbers we have been discussing all night. The May 2026 earthquake was a 6.0. The May 2018 flank earthquake was a 6.9. The 1868 Kau earthquake was a 7.9. And because of the way the magnitude scale works, that progression is far more dramatic than it looks. From 6.0 to 7.9 is nearly 2 full steps up the scale, which means the 1868 earthquake released something approaching 1,000 times the energy of the earthquake that shook the Kona Coast on May 22nd. The 1868 earthquake was a true catastrophe for the Hawaii of its time. It was associated with the same kind of flank movement we have been discussing, the great southern slopes of the island giving way. It generated a destructive tsunami along the southern coast. It triggered landslides, including a devastating mudslide that swept away lives. It shook down structures across a wide region. It remains the largest earthquake in the recorded history of the Hawaiian Islands, and it stands as the proof, the historical proof, that this island can produce earthquakes in a class that residents today have never experienced. The 1868 earthquake is worth lingering on, because the accounts that survive from it make the abstract idea of a great Hawaiian earthquake suddenly, viscerally real. Contemporary descriptions tell of ground that rolled in visible waves, of stone walls and structures shaken apart across the Kau and Kona districts, of the sea withdrawing and then returning as a destructive wave along the southern coast. And there was a second deadly mechanism, the violent shaking, acting on slopes already steepened and saturated, set off a catastrophic landslide, a mud flow that swept down and took lives in moments. So the 1868 event was not a single hazard. It was a cascade. The earthquake itself, then the tsunami it generated, then the landslides the shaking triggered. 1 rupture, 3 killers. That cascading character is the true signature of the island's largest earthquakes, and it is the reason the Great Earthquake System is in a category entirely apart from the deep flexural events. The 1868 event is not a prediction. Nothing in tonight's data suggests that a comparable earthquake is imminent, but it is essential context because it sets the true scale of the island's capability. When the United States Geological Survey maintains, as it does, a catalogue of every magnitude 6.0 and larger earthquake on the island of Hawaii going back to 1868, that catalogue is not a short or quiet document. It is a record of an island that has been seismically active, sometimes violently so, for the entire span of time that anyone has been keeping track. The magnitude 6.0 of May 22nd is simply the most recent line in a very long ledger, and to make the more recent past concrete, consider the benchmark that residents and scientists themselves reached for in describing this earthquake. The May 22nd event was widely described as the largest earthquake recorded anywhere in the Hawaiian archipelago since a magnitude 6.2 struck southwest of the island on the 10th of October 2021. Think about what that comparison tells you. It means that between October 2021 and May 2026, a span of about 4.5 years, the entire Hawaiian island chain did not experience a single earthquake as large as the one we are discussing tonight. 4.5 years of relative seismic quiet at this magnitude level, broken on the night of May 22nd. That is why so many residents said the same thing in the hours afterward. They said it had been a long time. They said they could not recall feeling anything like it. People who have lived on the Big Island for decades reached back through their memories and found the comparison was not a recent one. For a population accustomed to small tremors as a routine background fact of life, an earthquake of this size is genuinely rare enough to be a generational marker, a before and after night. And that rarity, that 4.5-year gap, is itself a quiet expression of the central theme of this video. The strain in the flexing crust does not release on a human schedule. It does not release every month or every year on a convenient timetable. It accumulates slowly and silently for as long as it takes, and then it releases in a single night, and then the long quiet accumulation begins again. So the island remembers. It remembers 1868, the Great Catastrophe. It remembers the flank earthquakes and the tsunamis. It remembers 2018 and 2021, and now it will remember the night of May 22nd, 2026. Each of these events, large and small, is the same island doing the same fundamental thing, bearing an enormous weight and periodically failing under it, in a variety of ways, at a variety of depths. And that brings us to the question that ties this entire investigation together. If this island can break in so many different ways at so many different depths, by so many different mechanisms, then how many ways are there, really? And the answer is that there are three. Three distinct ways this island makes the Earth move. And once you can see all three at once, you understand Hawaii completely differently. Part 11. 3 Ways. An Island Breaks. We have now, across this video, encountered 3 genuinely different kinds of earthquake on the island of Hawaii. They are easy to blur together because they all produce the same surface result: shaking ground, frightened people, rattled dishes. But they come from 3 different places, by 3 different mechanisms, and seeing them clearly as 3 separate systems operating in the same location is the single most useful mental model you can carry away from tonight. The first system is the one that produced the May 22nd earthquake. It is the deep flexural system. This is the crust beneath and around the island bending under the colossal weight of the volcanoes, storing strain in that bend and periodically failing along faults deep down at 20 kilometers and more. These are the earthquakes of weight, the earthquakes of load. They are the planet's crust groaning beneath a burden. The May 22nd magnitude 6.0 was one of these, and it can be a substantial earthquake, felt across the whole chain, capable of light to moderate damage. But it happens deep, and it does not move the ocean. The second system is the flank system. This is the sliding southern slopes of the volcanoes, riding seaward on the shallow décollement fault at the base of the volcanic pile, driven by gravity and by the spreading pressure of the volcanoes themselves. These are the earthquakes of collapse, the earthquakes of a mountain trying to slide into the sea. They are shallow, and they can be large, and the May 2018 magnitude 6.9 was one of them. This is the system with tsunami potential, the system that makes a coastal resident's blood run a little colder, because when the flank lurches it can shove the ocean. The third system is the rarest and the largest. It is the system of the truly great earthquakes, the once-in-many-generations events, the class represented by 1868 and its magnitude near 7.9. These are the earthquakes that combine the worst tendencies of the others on the largest possible scale, the catastrophic releases that reshape coastlines and generate destructive waves and live forever in the island's historical memory. They are rare, but the island has done it before, and an island that has done a thing before can do it again. 3 systems: deep flexure, sliding flank, great rupture. And here is the crucial point, the point that makes this more than just a tidy classification. These 3 systems are not independent. They are not 3 separate islands worth of hazard that happen to be filed under one name. They are 3 expressions of a single underlying condition, and that condition is the one we have circled back to in every single part of this video. The island of Hawaii is an enormous concentrated weight sitting on the thin, flexible skin of the planet. everything else follows from that. The deep crust bends because of the weight. The flanks slide because the volcanoes are heavy and steep and built on weak sediment. The great earthquakes happen because all of that stress, from all of those directions, occasionally finds a way to release catastrophically at once. One island, one overwhelming load. 3 different ways for the rock to fail beneath it. There is a useful way to picture the relationship between these 3 systems, and it is to think of them as operating on 3 different clocks. The deep flexural system runs on a relatively frequent clock. It produces felt earthquakes, events in the magnitude 5 and 6 range, every few years, because the flexural strain accumulates and releases at many points across a wide region. The May 22nd event and the magnitude 6.2 of 2021 before it are ticks of that clock. The flank system runs on a slower clock. Major flank earthquakes, events like the 2018 magnitude 6.9, come decades apart because they require a specific section of the decollement to lock, load, and then fail. And the great earthquake system runs on the slowest clock of all, the clock of 1868, measured in many decades or even centuries between events. 3 clocks, 3 rhythms, all ticking at once beneath the same island, all driven ultimately by the same accumulating weight. On any given night, you do not know which clock is closest to striking. What you know is that all 3 are running and that they have never stopped. This is why the May 22nd earthquake is worth 2 hours of your attention, even though, taken purely on its own, it was a survivable night with moderate damage. It is worth it because it is a doorway. It is a single, felt, datable event that, if you follow it down, opens onto the whole astonishing reality of what a Hawaiian island actually is. Most people picture Hawaii as a chain of paradises, and it is. But it is also one of the most dynamic, most heavily loaded, most seismically complex pieces of ground in the entire United States. It is a place where the Earth's crust is visibly, measurably, bent out of shape by the things sitting on top of it. It is a place with 3 separate ways to produce a major earthquake. The May 22nd event was the gentlest of the 3 speaking up. And the fact that it was the gentlest, the fact that this frightening, furniture-toppling, 4-island-shaking night was the mild version, is the real weight of the title's promise. That is what is meant by not even the worst part. But understanding the 3 systems also lets us return, finally and properly, to the question that has been humming underneath this entire video, the question of the volcano. Because now that you can see all 3 earthquake systems clearly, and now that you understand the eruption cycle of Kilauea, we can ask the real question, the one everyone wanted answered from the very first minute. Did the earthquake wake the volcano? And we can answer it not with a slogan, but with everything we now know. Part 12. What people are saying online. Before we return to the volcano, we have to do something this channel always does, and always will do, because it is a matter of respect for you, the person watching. We have to deal honestly with the alternative explanations, because in the hours after an earthquake like this one, the internet does not stay quiet, and not everything that spreads across it is true. Some of it is worth taking seriously and examining. All of it is worth addressing directly, rather than pretending it does not exist. So let us walk through what people were saying, and let us hold each claim up against the actual data. The first claim is the one we touched on earlier, and it is the most common claim that follows any earthquake anywhere. It is the claim that the magnitude was secretly larger, that the official number was quietly reduced, that the authorities are downplaying the event to keep the public calm. As we discussed, the seed of this claim is the genuine fact that 2 numbers circulated, 5.96 and 6.0. But we have already seen why that claim collapses the moment you examine it. The first number, 5.96, was the automatic computer estimate generated in the earthquake's first moments. The final number, 6.0, was the reviewed value. The revision went upward, not downward. And the entire history of that revision sits in a public, archived, internationally mirrored database. There is no version of a cover-up in which the conspirators make the number bigger and then publish every step of their work for the world to inspect. The magnitude revision is not evidence of concealment. It is evidence of ordinary science done in the open, exactly as designed. The second claim is the one about the volcano, the claim that the earthquake and the imminent eruption are secretly connected, and that authorities are hiding the link. We are going to address this fully in the next part because it deserves a full and careful answer rather than a quick dismissal. For now, simply hold the thought that the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory stated directly that the earthquake had no apparent effect on either volcano, and that the eruption forecast was made before the earthquake, based on the volcano's own measured behaviour. The third claim is the one that surfaces after nearly every significant geophysical event on Earth, and it is the claim that the earthquake was not natural at all, that it was manufactured, produced deliberately by some human technology, whether a high-energy facility, a directed energy weapon, or an underground test. This claim deserves a real answer, not a sneer, and the real answer is about energy, and it is genuinely decisive. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake releases an amount of seismic energy on the order of 10 to the 13th power joules. Written out, that is a number with 13 zeros after it. It is a quantity of energy so vast that the human mind has no intuitive grip on it. Now consider the facilities that conspiracy theories typically blame. A high-frequency research transmitter, the kind most often named, operates at a power output measured in megawatts. The gap between the energy such a facility can deliver and the energy released by a magnitude 6 earthquake is not a small gap. It is a chasm of many orders of magnitude. It would be like claiming that a single household light bulb, left on for a few seconds, somehow heated an entire ocean. The numbers do not just fail to support the claim, they obliterate it. There is no human technology, none, that can deposit 10 to the 13th joules of energy into a specific patch of rock 22 kilometers beneath the surface of the Earth. But there is something that can. And this is the part of the conspiracy conversation that I find genuinely worth dwelling on, because the honest answer to the conspiracy is so much more impressive than the conspiracy itself. The thing that can load that much energy into deep rock is the mechanism we have spent this entire video describing. It is the slow, patient, planetary-scale process of an entire island chain. Trillions of tons of volcanic rock, pressing down on the crust of the Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, bending that crust, storing strain in the bend, accumulating energy on a geological timescale, until the rock can hold no more and releases it in a few seconds. You do not need a secret weapon to explain this earthquake. You need only the weight of Hawaii and the patience of geology. The real explanation is bigger, older, and far more powerful than anything any human institution could engineer. The conspiracy imagines a hidden machine. The truth is that the machine is the planet itself. And the fourth and final idea worth addressing is the softer one, the one that is less a conspiracy than an anxious feeling. It is the sense that Hawaii is becoming more dangerous, that the earthquakes are multiplying, that something is escalating. The honest response is grounding rather than dismissive. The island of Hawaii has always been one of the most seismically active places in the United States. The earthquakes are not new. What has changed over the decades is mostly the density of the instruments that detect them, and the density of the people and the buildings exposed to them. More sensors detect more small events. More homes and more residents mean any given earthquake produces more reports, more damage, more attention. The island is not newly dangerous. It has always been a place where the ground moves. The May 22nd earthquake is not a sign of a new and accelerating threat. It is a sign of the same old, deep, structural truth that has been true since long before anyone was here to feel it. It is worth being honest about why the escalation feeling is so persistent, though, because simply dismissing it does not make it go away, and the people who feel it are not foolish for feeling it. We live now inside a constant stream of information. Every significant earthquake anywhere on Earth reaches us within minutes, complete with maps and footage and eyewitness accounts. A century ago, an earthquake on a distant island was a paragraph in a newspaper days later, if it was reported at all. Today, it is a notification on your phone. So the raw number of earthquakes you personally hear about has genuinely skyrocketed, not because the Earth is more active, but because the planet has been wired with sensors and screens that did not exist before. The mind takes that flood of awareness and quietly mistranslates it into a feeling that the ground itself is becoming more violent. It is not. The Earth is doing very nearly what it has always done. What has changed is that we are finally watching all of it, all the time. The challenge of an age like this one is to stay informed without letting the volume of information curdle into a false sense of accelerating doom. And the antidote to that is exactly what this channel tries to provide. Not less information, but better context for the information. Not fewer earthquakes in your awareness, but a clearer understanding of what each one actually means, With all of that cleared away, with the alternative claims examined and answered honestly, we can finally return to the volcano with clear eyes and ask the question properly. Part 13. Did the earthquake wake the volcano? So, did it? Did the magnitude 6.0 earthquake of May 22nd wake the volcano, trigger the eruption, set off episode 48? This is the question that has been waiting at the centre of this video from the first minute. The question the title itself dangles in front of you. The question that every instinct in the human mind wants answered with a dramatic yes. And now, finally, with everything we have built up, we can answer it properly. The answer is no. But the no is far more interesting than a flat denial, and it comes with a fascinating and genuine qualification. So stay with me, because this is where it all comes together. Start with the straightforward reasons the answer is no. We have established them piece by piece across this video, and now we can lay them out in a row. First, the depth. The earthquake happened 22 kilometers down, in the deep flexural crust, in the structural foundation of the island. Kilauea's eruptive machinery, the magma chambers and conduits that actually feed the fountaining at Halemaumau, sits far above that, in the shallow plumbing within a few kilometers of the surface. The earthquake did not happen in the volcano's plumbing, it happened in the basement, far below it. Second, the mechanism. The earthquake was a flexural event, the crust failing under the island's weight. It was not a magmatic event. No magma moved to cause it. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, the most authoritative voice on this volcano on Earth, examined it and stated plainly that it was not a volcanic process, and that it had no apparent effect on either Mauna Loa or Kilauea. Third, and this one is decisive, the timing of the forecast. The prediction that episode 48 would arrive between May 24th and May 27th was issued before the earthquake struck. It was based entirely on the measured inflation of Kilauea's summit, on the volcano slowly refilling with magma on its own internal schedule. The eruption was already loaded, it was already coming. An earthquake cannot trigger an eruption that was already forecast to happen on its own. The volcano did not need the earthquake, and the earthquake did not change the volcano's timetable. So on the specific, dramatic question, did this earthquake cause episode 48? The answer is a clear and well-supported no. If episode 48 begins, as forecast in the days after the earthquake, it will not be because the earthquake summoned it. It will be because Kilauea refilled, the way it always does, on the schedule the inflation data predicted before the ground ever shook. And consider how strong that prediction actually is, because it is the cleanest possible test of the trigger claim. The forecast window for episode 48, between May 24th and May 27th, was published by the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, based on a measurement that has nothing to do with earthquakes at all. It is based on inflation, on the slow instrument-measured swelling of Kilauea's summit as magma accumulates beneath it. Volcanologists have watched this episodic eruption pulse again and again, episode after episode, and they have learned its rhythm. They know roughly how much the summit must inflate before the volcano unleashes its next fountain, and they can watch that inflation climb in real time. So when they said episode 48 would likely arrive between May 24th and 27th, that was a forecast grounded in the volcano's own internal clock, a clock that had been ticking steadily since episode 47 ended on May 15th. The earthquake of May 22nd did not appear in that forecast, was not part of that reasoning, and did not need to be. If you want a single fact that dismantles the trigger story completely, it is this. The eruption was scheduled before the earthquake happened, by people watching the volcano refill, and the earthquake changed that schedule not at all. You cannot trigger something that was already on its way. This is, in its own quiet way, one of the most reassuring things in this entire video. It is a demonstration that the volcano is genuinely understood, genuinely monitored, and genuinely predictable on the timescale that matters. The people of the Big Island were not blindsided by Kilauea. The eruption cycle is watched around the clock by some of the best volcanologists on Earth, working with one of the densest monitoring networks ever assembled around a volcano. The earthquake was a surprise, as earthquakes always are, because the deep flexural faults do not announce themselves in advance. But the volcano was not a surprise. The volcano was, in the most literal sense, on a forecast. But here is the qualification, and it is the part I genuinely want you to remember, because it is where the honest science becomes more interesting than the myth. To say that this particular earthquake did not trigger this particular eruption is not the same as saying earthquakes and volcanoes on this island never interact. They do. We have already seen the proof. Recall what we discussed about the May 2018 flank earthquake. That magnitude 6.9, by releasing an enormous quantity of stress from a section of the De Coleman fault, appears to have stalled the slow slip behaviour of that fault for what scientists estimate could be close to 60 years. That is a documented, peer-reviewed case of a major Hawaiian earthquake measurably and durably changing the behaviour of a fault system intimately tied to the volcano. Earthquakes and volcanic systems on this island absolutely can influence one another. They are mechanically connected. They are part of one system. So the honest, complete answer to the question is layered, and it is worth holding all the layers at once. Did the May 22nd earthquake trigger episode 48? No, and the evidence against that is strong and clear. Are earthquakes and volcanoes on the island of Hawaii part of one interconnected web of stress, in which large events can reshape the behaviour of faults and systems around them? Yes, absolutely. And that is an active and fascinating frontier of real science. The error is not in sensing a connection between the island's earthquakes and its volcanoes. The connection is real. The error is in collapsing that subtle, system-wide, long-time-scale connection into a crude and false claim that one specific deep earthquake flipped a switch and set off one specific eruption days later. The truth is not a switch. The truth is a web. It is worth being precise about why the human mind reaches so hard for the trigger story, because understanding the pull of it is part of resisting it. We are pattern-finding creatures. When two striking things happen close together in time and space, the mind does not see a coincidence, it sees a cause. An erupting volcano, and then, days before its next great fountain, a major earthquake on the same island. The two events sit so close together that the mind almost refuses to hold them apart. It wants the line connecting them. It wants the story where one thing leads to the next, because a world of causes feels more comprehensible, and frankly more controllable, than a world where two big things simply happen to share a week. But the universe is under no obligation to arrange itself into the stories we find satisfying. Sometimes two significant things happen on the same island in the same week because that island is so geologically active that significant things happen there all the time, and occasionally they cluster. That is not a hidden mechanism. That is just what it looks like to live on the most restless ground in the country. The discipline this channel tries to practice, and the discipline I would ask you to practice with us, is to feel the pull of the trigger story, to notice it, and then to ask what the actual evidence supports. And in this case, the evidence is clear. Two voices, one island, no single cause connecting that specific earthquake to that specific eruption. And that web is the deepest reason this island deserves your attention and your respect. On the island of Hawaii, the deep crust is bending under the weight of the land. The flanks of the volcanoes are sliding slowly toward the sea. Magma is rising from the hotspot and refilling the summit of Kilauea on its own patient rhythm. And all of these processes are unfolding in the same place, at the same time, pressing and pulling on the same overloaded ground, occasionally influencing one another in ways scientists are still working to fully map. The earthquake and the eruption of this past week were not the same event, and one did not cause the other. But they were both expressions of the same restless, overloaded, extraordinary island. They were two different voices, and the island was speaking with both of them at once. Part 14. The Strain That Has Nowhere to Go. Let us return at the end to that kitchen on the Kona Coast, to the family on the floor, to the grandmother standing over the child, taking the falling glass on her own back, while the cabinets emptied themselves and the armoire went over and the toilet cracked. That was the human face of this earthquake, and we should not let 2 hours of geology carry us so far away from it that we forget what a magnitude 6.0 actually means to the people who live above it. It means a genuinely frightening night. It means a home you have to put back together. It means, for the people on Oahu who felt their floors move and could not remember ever feeling such a thing before, a small and unsettling reminder that the ground they trust is not as fixed as it seems. But we have also, across this video, followed that earthquake down through the broken dishes, down past the shallow rumble of the volcanoes, down to 22 kilometers into the deep crust, and there we found something that should change the way you see those islands forever. We found that the Hawaiian Islands are heavy in a way that is almost difficult to comprehend, heavy enough that they bend the crust of the earth beneath them. The most beautiful islands on the planet are also an immense weight pressing on the thin skin of the world, and the skin of the world is flexing under that weight, and the flexing stores strain, and the strain has nowhere to go but into the rock, where it waits and accumulates, until one night it releases, and a family on the Kona Coast finds themselves on the kitchen floor. The magnitude 6.0 of May 22nd was one release of that strain, one withdrawal from an account that the weight of the islands keeps refilling, and we found, as we followed the story outward, that this deep flexural earthquake is only one of 3 ways this island can break. There is the sliding flank, riding seaward on its shallow detachment fault, the system that produced the magnitude 6.9 of 2018, and that carries, unlike the flexural earthquakes, the power to move the ocean. And there are the great earthquakes, the rare and catastrophic ruptures, the class of 1868 and its magnitude near 7.9, the events that live in the island's longest memory. 3 systems, 1 overloaded island, and the one we felt on May 22nd was the gentlest of the 3. I want to be careful, here at the end, not to leave you with the wrong feeling, because the wrong feeling is easy to absorb from a story like this, and it does not serve anyone. The wrong feeling is dread, the sense that Hawaii is some kind of doomed place, a disaster waiting to happen, a paradise with a curse on it. That is not the lesson, and it is not the truth. The people of the Hawaiian Islands have lived with this restless ground for as long as people have been there, and the deep Hawaiian relationship with these volcanoes, woven through generations of knowledge and tradition, has always understood the land as something alive, something powerful, something to be respected rather than feared. The right feeling to carry away from tonight is not dread, it is respect. It is the difference between a person who walks past a sleeping animal, assuming it is a statue, and a person who walks past the same animal, knowing exactly what it is. The second person is not paralyzed by fear. They are simply awake. They see clearly, and seeing clearly is the whole purpose of 2 hours like this one. Not to frighten you about Hawaii, but to let you see Hawaii as it actually is, which is far more remarkable than the postcard, and far more alive. That is the real meaning of the words in the title. The earthquake that struck an island with an erupting volcano on it was not even the worst part. The worst part is everything the earthquake points to. The worst part is the realization that this was the mild version, the deep and survivable version, and that the same island holds the capacity for so much more. Not as a prediction, not as a warning that catastrophe is near, because nothing in tonight's data says that, but as a sober, clear-eyed understanding of what kind of place this actually is. Hawaii is not only a paradise. Hawaii is one of the most geologically alive, most heavily loaded, most seismically intricate pieces of ground in the United States, and the people who love it are living on top of a planet that is visibly straining to bear it, and there is a strange beauty in that if you let yourself see it. The same forces that make the Big Island restless are the forces that built it in the first place. The hotspot that loads the crust is the hotspot that raised the mountains. The weight that bends the seafloor is the weight of land that did not exist a few million years ago, and that is still, tonight, being added to. The earthquakes are not a malfunction of the island. They are the island being made. Every tremor, every flexural slip, every adjustment of the overloaded crust is part of the same vast process that pulled these volcanoes up out of the deep Pacific and turned a patch of empty ocean into one of the most extraordinary places on Earth. To live in Hawaii is to live on a piece of the planet that is still, visibly, under construction. The shaking is the price of the paradise. They are not 2 separate things. They are the same thing seen from 2 different nights. And here is the thought I want to leave you holding, the question that genuinely cannot be answered tonight, no matter how many seismometers we point at the island. The Hawaiian hotspot is not finished. It is still rising, still feeding magma upward, still building. The Big Island is still growing. A new volcano is already taking shape on the seafloor to the southeast, which means the load is not fixed. The weight on the crust is not constant. It is increasing slowly, relentlessly, eruption by eruption, lava flow by lava flow, century by century. The plank is being asked to bear more, not less, and so the flexing will continue, and the strain will keep accumulating, and the deep crust beneath those beautiful islands will keep doing what it did on the night of May 22nd. It will hold the weight as long as it can, and then, somewhere, at some depth, on some night no one can name in advance, it will reach its limit again, and it will slip, and the islands will shake, and somewhere a family will find themselves on the floor. So the next time you see Hawaii on a screen, the beaches, the bays, the impossible blue of the water, hold both images in your mind at once. Hold the paradise because the paradise is real, and hold the other thing, the deeper thing, the image of an island so massive it bends the crust of the earth, an island riding on sliding flanks and flexing rock, an island that is still being built and that shakes because it is still being built. That double image, the paradise and the restless engine beneath it, is the true Hawaii. It is more honest than the postcard, and stranger, and in the end, far more astonishing. The people on the Kona Coast who were knocked from their feet on the night of May 22nd were not living on a broken paradise. They were living on a working one, on a piece of the planet still in motion, still under construction, still alive. The earthquake was not a freak event. It was not an anomaly. It was the sound of an island too heavy for the earth, doing the only thing such an island can ever do. And the strain that built that earthquake is already, tonight, beginning to gather again. The only questions the planet has left us are where it goes next and when, and those the island is not yet ready to answer.